Live from Washington, this is BBC News. Israel presses forward with its ground operation in Gaza as it intensifies its air assault. For people in Gaza, more devastation and a communications blackout there. The situation in some areas is now catastrophic.
A week ago, the hospital was out of service because of no fuel and was evacuated. But today, the main building of the hospital was destroyed.
Thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters march through London and cities across Europe. Plus, the death toll from Storm Otis climbs to 39 as Mexico cleans up and searches for those still missing. Hello, I'm Carl Nassman. We begin with the latest now from Gaza, where the Hamas-run health ministry says the death toll in the territory has now passed 8,000 people. Israel has been bombing Gaza since the October 7th Hamas attack that killed some 1,400 people. You see now some of the latest images coming in of the airstrikes currently across the Gaza Strip. Hundreds more during that attack on Israel were taken as hostages. Israeli Defense Forces have said its latest nighttime attacks struck some 150 targets and killed some key figures within Hamas, which is designated as a terror group by the UK, US, and many other Western nations. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the ground operation in Gaza has entered a second phase with Israeli troops in Gaza's north and in the south. He's also warned that the war with Hamas will be long and difficult. Speaking at a joint news conference with his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, and emergency war cabinet member Benny Gantz, Mr. Netanyahu described the conflict as Israel's second war of independence. He declared Israel would win the war and make every effort to bring the hostages back home. Also on Saturday, in his first comments since the war began 3 weeks ago, Hamas's leader in the Gaza Strip has offered to release all Israeli hostages being held in Gaza in return for the freeing of all Hamas prisoners in Israeli jails. Now, in a statement, Yahya Sinwar says, "We are ready for an immediate exchange deal that includes the release of all prisoners in the prisons of the Zionist enemy in exchange for the release of all prisoners with the resistance." Now, Danny Danon is a member of Israel's Knesset who sits on the Israeli Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and he shared with the BBC his reaction to Hamas calling for that prisoner swap.
It's not the first time that Hamas is conducting a warfare, psychological warfare. They are trying to confuse everybody. There were a few serious negotiators in the last few days who were trying to broker a deal between Israel and Hamas, and it didn't go anywhere. They were playing games with the negotiators, and we realized that they're not serious about it. I think now when we started to apply more pressure against Hamas, and we are killing more terrorists, maybe that will create the atmosphere for a serious negotiations. And we are determined. We are determined to bring our hostages back to Israel and to eliminate Hamas. They are not going to escape from the atrocity they committed 3 weeks ago.
Well, we have teams reporting across the region. We start with our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, who reports now from Sderot in southern Israel.
Heavy artillery is pounding Gaza constantly. The Israelis say they're making the earth shake. And as residents of one of Gaza City's refugee camps inspected what had happened in the night, that was how it felt. It's like an earthquake, said Al Ahmadi. No one's paying us attention. It's an execution. Many Palestinians believe Israel wants to force them out of Gaza, and they interpret it as a threat, not a warning, when Israel's army tells them again to move south from places like this. As for the Israeli people, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a solemn warning.
The war inside the Gaza Strip will be difficult and long, and we are prepared for it. This is our second war of independence. We will fight for the defense of the homeland.
In Sderot, the Israeli town closest to Gaza, the streets where Hamas killed civilians and soldiers 3 weeks ago today are deserted. The danger didn't stop Zila Cohen and her son driving down here to bring a picnic to her daughters who are doing their military service. They sat down in a car park not far from the border wire. The war, they said, was about survival. Hamas had shown it wanted to force them out. You can hear the war. Aren't you scared?
I'm scared, but if my daughter is here, so I go where she's here.
And you bring lunch.
Yes, to all the soldiers.
You know, when you live side by side with people, and you come to understand that you cannot trust them. So what you do? What the answer for that? What any other nation would have done? Much more that we are doing right now, and I'm assuring you, much more that we will ever do.
The new phase of Israel's assault started last night with dozens of airstrikes. Israel believes overwhelming military strength can pacify Gaza. But military power alone has never brought lasting quiet, let alone peace, in this conflict's long history. Israel claimed one of its strikes killed a senior Hamas commander. Israeli tanks and soldiers moved forward into the north of the Gaza Strip. Gaza's visible from a hill in Sderot. Israel will resist pressure for a ceasefire. And there's another factor. The more Palestinians that Israel kills, especially civilians, the greater the levels of anger and outrage elsewhere in the Middle East among Israel's friends as well as its enemies. Now, that doesn't guarantee that the war would spread, but it does increase levels of anger and volatility in a part of the world that is already very fragile. Israel's ground war has started. Containing it here is now the biggest political and diplomatic challenge in the world. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News in southern Israel.
Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams is in Jerusalem, and he spoke with my colleague Helena Humphrey a little bit earlier.
Paul, thanks so much for joining us. So we've had a key address today from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying this is the second phase of the war. What does that phase look like?
Well, we already know what it looks like because for the last 24 hours or so, Israeli forces have been in the Gaza Strip in some numbers and with armoured support, conducting operations in certain areas in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. The Israelis are saying that they have killed more Hamas commanders. They are obviously looking to establish some kind of a foothold in the northern Gaza Strip from which they are likely to expand their operations in the coming days. I think perhaps we've all gotten used to the idea that maybe we would see some huge invasion, a kind of D-Day style invasion in which all the Israeli forces would go in one go. I think that's perhaps less likely. I think we're likely to see more of these sorts of operations, but they're likely to get bigger in scope and they're likely to be longer in duration. So I think that is very much the way this is evolving.
And Paul, you have been reporting that the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip has offered to release Israeli hostages in return for Hamas prisoners. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this was the first public statement at all from Yahya al-Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza, since this whole crisis began just over 3 weeks ago. And so it's quite significant that he chose this moment to make that offer. What was also interesting was that shortly before that, at his press conference, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was asked, would you be prepared to release Palestinian prisoners in return for the release of the hostages? And he didn't rule it out, but he said that it would be unwise to talk about it publicly. Now, we have no way of knowing at the moment whether such a deal is on the cards. There are some former senior Israeli officials saying that it would be a good thing to do, that it would be a good idea to release hundreds, perhaps even thousands of Palestinian prisoners in return for the hostages. And there are certainly people in the region, including countries like Qatar, who are trying very, very hard to engineer just such a thing. But just to emphasise, we cannot see any sign of it unfolding at the moment.
And Paul, communications, as we know, are down in the Gaza Strip right now. But I do understand that you have been receiving some voice messages from people inside the Strip. What have they been telling you?
Well, as you can imagine, they're reporting an incredibly chaotic situation. The messages that we're getting are a little fragmentary. Sometimes they're voice recordings. You can hear the sounds of explosions in the background. They talk about families desperately trying to locate missing family members, of ambulances that race towards explosions but not knowing exactly where they're going or what they're expecting to find when they get there. Life is incredibly difficult for the aid agencies that are on the ground. The UN told me that they have about 10 satellite phones which some of their key members are trying to use to coordinate their activities at a time when they, the UN, are looking after the interests of 600,000 people sheltering in their facilities. It's an incredibly chaotic situation under sustained gunfire, and the UN would argue utterly unsustainable unless more aid gets in and unless there's some kind of pause to allow that aid to get to where it's needed.
All right, our diplomatic correspondent there, Paul Adams. Paul, thanks for your reporting.
Well, even as communication with people inside Gaza remains difficult, phone and internet connections are still down. Our correspondent there, Rushdie Abu-Alouf, has finally been able to get through to us, and he sent us this report a short time ago.
You know, communication is very, very difficult in Gaza since 24 hours, as Israel cut all of the communication. Mobile carrier, the two main mobile carriers are not functioning. The internet lines are not functioning in everywhere, and getting information is really hard and difficult. Very few people who are still having international SIM cards and they can do roaming using Israeli mobile services, people who are close to the border, they still can communicate, and between time to time they post some on social media. They also, some of the local radio stations are still functioning, and they were able to talk to their correspondent in the north, who described what happened last night as the biggest ever airstrike that targeted this area. He said that it was like an earthquake. We understand that the Indonesian hospital was struck with an airstrike yesterday. The hospital was out of service for quite a long time, like a week ago. The hospital was out of service because of no fuel and was evacuated. But today it was, the main building of the hospital was destroyed. Also around Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, there was a lot of airstrikes, 10, 15 airstrikes according to people around Shifa Hospital. They are cutting most of the roads towards that hospital. Communication, as I said, is extremely difficult. We are unable to verify a lot of reports about the number of people dead or injured, but as far as the health ministry was doing a press conference this afternoon, they said about 400 people were killed overnight, but they said hundreds other are missing under the collapsed building in the north.
Our correspondent Rushdie Abu-Alouf there reporting from southern Gaza. Let's get more now on the situation in Israel and in Gaza. I'm joined here in studio by Barbara Starr, a USC Annenberg Center senior fellow and longtime Pentagon correspondent. And we also have joining us Laura Blumenfeld, a Middle East analyst at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And Laura, just to start with you, I'd love to get your reaction on what we've been seeing playing out over these last couple of hours from Israel and what they're calling now this second phase of the war.
Right, it's almost a non-invasion invasion. They're moving into the next phase, but the last thing they want to do is trigger a second front on the northern border. I think that's why you see them. It's sort of a toe in the cold water, just bit by bit, and that's sort of how Israel tends to succeed. When they have targeted strikes, not a broad fist, but a pointed finger. And I think that the United States is encouraging that as well, because they're trying to limit the scope of the conflict.
And Barbara, your reaction there, a toe in the water, potentially maybe some caution given some of the clashes we've been seeing on that border with Lebanon.
Well, I think that's right. I think Laura's exactly on point. The U.S., the allies, and even Israel, they do not want to open up a second front. They don't want Hezbollah to jump in and start attacking from southern Lebanon and Syria into Israel. We are seeing plenty of strikes across that border already, but they want to keep it under control. And so that's one priority, even as they continue to move forward in Gaza. And I think that's why there's a lot of effort on the part of the U.S. to encourage going a little slow, picking your targets, knowing what you're going after, trying to limit those civilian casualties amongst the Palestinian population.
Of course, the latest casualty number that we're getting, around 8,000 people coming from the Hamas authority there that have been killed already in Gaza. Now, Laura, just coming back to you, I know you served as a senior policy advisor on the U.S. Israel-Palestine negotiating team. Interestingly, we also now have this message, this offer coming from the leader of Hamas in Gaza to free these hostages in exchange for all of the Palestinian prisoners being held in Israel. In your mind, is that something that Israel might have to consider?
Well, look, from Hamas's point of view, they achieved their strategic, their military goals. They're ready to pivot now to work on their world image. For Israelis, it's exactly the opposite. Right, everything they've ever accomplished has been through projection of strength, and yet they were caught off guard. I mean, Netanyahu's slogan has been peace through strength, and now he has war through weakness. So no, I think that the Israelis are going to, yes, go for a hostage deal, but only after they have a good pounding and pummeling of Hamas militarily. That's the only way they can restore deterrence. Don't forget that Benjamin Netanyahu rose to fame through a hostage crisis. In 1976, his brother was a commando who led the raid on Entebbe and paid with his life. And the first time anybody ever saw Netanyahu publicly was crying at his brother's funeral. So it's not only political or military, it's personal for him, the hostage crisis.
Barbara, these 200 or so hostages, how much are they looming over not only the military response from Israel, but potentially also a political response?
Well, I think Netanyahu sort of put them as a second priority, if you will, earlier today. Military destruction of Hamas, item number one on the agenda. But I'm not sure how long that will be able to last. The families of these people are under tremendous strain inside Israel. They want their loved ones back. And, you know, it's not just the hostages. We have a number of American citizens and Israeli, non-Palestinian citizens still in Gaza trying to get out. They have not been able to do that. There are an awful lot of people who want to see the hostages and those civilians able to get out of Gaza
we saw that pressure, didn't we, coming directly from the families in Israel?
We did. I mean, the families, I think, have made it clear they want their loved ones back at the cost of releasing the Palestinian prisoners, which doesn't exactly fit in with Netanyahu's objective for the military defeat of Hamas. So the pressure is likely to only build over the coming days, I think.
Laura, speaking of pressure, we've heard now several calls for a ceasefire. We saw just yesterday the United Nations passing a non-binding resolution calling for the release of hostages, a ceasefire, humanitarian considerations. How much is the pressure mounting on Israel? How should Israel respond to many calls from around the globe to come and allow aid, at least, into Gaza?
Well, look, there's clearly an inverse relationship between humanitarian suffering in Gaza and support for Israel. That said, if you talk to the Israelis, here's their mindset. You know, I'd rather be hated and alive than loved and dead. For them, when Netanyahu said this is like a second war of independence, what he meant was in 1948, we were fighting for our physical borders. Now we're fighting for the very idea of Israel, where the safe haven for the Jewish people has been turned into a slaughterhouse. So yes, they hear, you know, the cry for a ceasefire, but for them, it really is a fight to the death. Former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert once said to me, when it comes to Hamas, all they want to do is kill us. This isn't an eye for an eye. It is an eye.
Of course, we're not just talking about Hamas here, are we? We're talking about innocent civilians, people living in Gaza, and that's where we hear those calls even from the head of the United Nations saying that aid does need to be delivered to avoid even more casualties among people who don't play any role in this conflict.
Absolutely, and I think that is on Israel, and you know that's why you have President Biden saying, you know, we've got your back, but whispering very loudly in their ears, don't forget your humanity. How you fight this matters. How you fight this and how you frame this will make a difference in the long run for your long-term survival. Absolutely. That's again why the United States is so important here in framing it as a clash. This isn't Israelis versus Arabs, right? This is civilization versus savagery. we're pitching a peace tent. Are you in or are you out? And Israel, you need to be in with us on the right side of morality.
Barbara, now we've heard from several high-ranking members of Israel's government, including the prime minister himself, saying, essentially, Israel, brace yourself. This could be a conflict that may not be quick. It may go on for a long period of time. What do you expect going forward? How long could this go?
Well, I think the U.S. is perhaps got the military history of the last 22 years or so in its back pocket. Look at what the U.S. military, the U.S. administrations over the years went through in fighting in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, across Africa against terror organizations. I think the message here is you may think that you're going in to militarily destroy Hamas, but how exactly do you do that with Iran again supporting Hamas so strongly, with another generation of youth coming up in the region who are anti-US, anti-Israel? And even if you killed every single person that had the label Hamas supporter, there will be more. You cannot kill your way out of a war. Any U.S. military commander will tell you wars are resolved at the negotiating table.
Laura Blumenfeld, we have about a minute left. I just want to give you the last word here as someone who has dealt with these sorts of issues. Is this something that has a military end, or will both sides, Hamas, or maybe even looking towards the West Bank, and Israel, need to come to the negotiating table at some point?
Yes, and we heard that from Secretary Blinken this week when he said we can't go back to the status quo. I think there will be negotiations in our future. When I worked for the State Department under President Obama, we focused on tangible issues, right? There was borders, security, Jerusalem, refugees. I think one thing that is certain going forward for the next round of negotiations, we're going to also have to pay attention to the intangibles, things like narrative. The two societies obviously have clashing narratives, and we need to address that. And trauma, right? This is not a world war, but the world is at war, at least psychologically, given the use of images, just horrifying, the live streaming of homicide and the suffering. So I think we're going to have to pay attention to that going into the next round of negotiations. Intangibles matter.
Right. Laura Blumenfeld, staff writer at the Washington Post, Middle East analyst at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Barbara Starr here in studio, a longtime Pentagon correspondent. Thank you so much to you both. Israel says at least 229 hostages still being held by Hamas inside Gaza. Our reporter Lucy Williamson now from Tel Aviv on new concerns about their safety amid Israel's latest attacks.
There are those in Israel watching the bombing of a people and seeing only one single face. Their child, parent, spouse, sibling. In Tel Aviv, they've laid a place for each of them at a Shabbat table. More than 200 hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Their families today demanded to speak to Israel's prime minister about his escalation of the war. Jonathan was one of the hostages taken from the Nova Festival site.
What would you say to Prime Minister Netanyahu if he comes here today? You've asked him to come here. What happens?
We want him to come here, to look to my eyes and tell me, you should trust me. To tell me, listen, the kidnap is in first priority. After that, he will get all the support of all the country to kill all the Hamas. But now, first of all, our kidnapped.
Meeting representatives of the families tonight, Mr. Netanyahu suggested that the heavy bombing could help bring the hostages home. The families said they'd consider releasing all Israel's Palestinian prisoners as a price worth paying to get their relatives back.
24 hours ago, hope was beginning to sprout here. 4 hostages had been released, negotiations were ongoing, and there was talk of a deal to release many more. Now, 24 hours later, the mood here is different.
A member of the kibbutz, Yafa, she was one of the founders of the kibbutz.
One of the freed hostages told Lior Perry that she'd seen his father Chaim alive and well in Gaza. The first news of him since he was taken captive from kibbutz near Oz.
Now it puts me in a very delicate spot because now I have something to lose. And that's the worst thing, because I know that Hamas didn't kill my father yet, okay? And I know that now the ball is in the Israeli court now.
As Benjamin Netanyahu met families this evening, sirens cleared the memorial site. More rockets sent from Gaza, intercepted in the skies above Tel Aviv. Israel says destroying Hamas is about protecting its people. Protecting which people? Families here ask. Bring their relatives home, they say. Everything else can wait. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
As Lucy was just reporting there, among the hostages there are believed to be these 3 Israeli children and their mother. Their father, Avichai Brodich, has traveled to Washington, D.C. to petition U.S. lawmakers to help secure their release and that of other children being held hostage in Gaza by Hamas. On Friday, we spoke with Avichai.
Avichai, thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News. And I can imagine it must be an incredibly difficult time. So we really appreciate you coming into the studio today. I understand it's probably difficult to talk about what happened to your wife and your 3 young children when they were taken hostage on your kibbutz. But if you are able, can you tell me a little bit about what happened?
Sure. That's what I'm here for, and thanks for having me. You know, on that day, on October 7th, we live in Kfar Aza. It's a kibbutz just right by the border with the Gaza Strip. My house is the first one on the fence, so it's the closest to Gaza. You know, I open my bedroom window and I see the Gaza Strip. I have to say, you know, we never felt threatened or anything by anything, actually. We have a beautiful kibbutz, and you know, we have a good, peaceful life, and we're peaceful people. On that day, October 7th, there were very large bombings and rockets coming our way. It was something very unusual, because we're used to things like that, but not that intensive. Well, it took a few minutes, and a girl came running to our house. My wife took her in. She was the neighbor's girl. We later learned that her parents were killed. So she came running away from the shootings, and my wife took her into the shelter in our house. We have a safe room, so they were hiding over there. For 4.5 hours, I wasn't home, and at around 11, I got I kept texting my wife. The lines were down, so we could only text. And around 11, I got the last message. It was, they're coming in. That's the last message I got. And that's it, you know. I kept texting and getting no message back. I was sure that they were dead. So, you know, everybody asked me where my family was and if they're safe, and I told them they're dead. You know, I'm just alone in this world. But then a day later, I heard news from somebody in the kibbutz that they were seen walking out alive, being led someone and heading over to the Gaza Strip. Now, in usual times, this is terrible news, but at that time, when I thought they were dead, it was the best news I ever got. So I felt like I got my family back, and you know, I'm still living on this same news because I have no real new news since then. So it's been 3 weeks, and you know, I have no information, nothing at all about my family and this other girl, Abigail. So it's my wife, my 3 kids, our 3 kids, and Abigail, my friend's daughter.
Tell me about your family. What are they like, and how do you think they're holding up?
Well, you know, I live on hope right now. That's why I'm here. And you know, my wife and I, we've been together for 22 years. So she's, you know, she's everything to me. And You know, she does everything at home and everything for me, and so I know she's strong. You know, if I could pick anyone in this world to be with my kids, you know, obviously it would be my wife. So, you know, I believe in her, and I know she's doing everything she can to, you know, for them, wherever they are. You know, I hope they're together. My little one, Uriah, my youngest, he's 4.5 years old. He's really great, you know, he makes a lot of mess around the house, you know, but I really miss him. I wish he could make a big mess right now. You know, usually I'm really angry at him, but, you know, now I guess I'll just let him do whatever he wants.
I bet. You said that you are living on hope right now, but I just wonder how you are doing personally. And I also understand that you sustained injuries in the attack as well. How are you?
Well, you know, I'm doing good. I came all the way over here to Washington to try and persuade the world, you know, to listen to me and to do the obvious thing, which is, you know, let the families be together. My children, you know, are innocent. My wife's innocent. And, you know, it's such an obvious thing. Everybody knows it, you know. I've come here and I got so much support from people over here in Washington, be it, you know, congressmen and senators and just people, you know, they come and some of them recognize me and just give me big hugs. You know, a lady came today to the hotel and she prayed for us. So we all prayed together. So I think everybody knows this very basic thing about, you know, the innocent children, that they should be with their dad, and that my wife, you know, should be at home with me. You know, I sleep alone right now. I should be with my wife, with my kids nearby playing. So, yeah, I am doing well, you know, I'm alive and well, you know, physically. But, you know, inside, I'm in a wreck. Of course. I'm just a wreck, so I really...
can imagine. You were mentioning there about meeting with lawmakers here on Capitol Hill, a range of them, including Senator Chuck Schumer, I know. What kind of messages have they been giving you? What kind of support?
We just got, you know, brilliant support from everyone. I think this issue is just an issue in humanity. It's not even an issue of conflict. It's just, so we got so much support, and everybody said they would do everything they can for us, you know, try to move things around. This is America, they can do a lot, we know that, and I think they are doing the maximum they can. But we need to move around, you know, the Israeli government, you know, my government. We have to make them do the right thing. And, you know, Hamas, I think they also have the same beliefs as us about, you know, keeping women and children out of this conflict. So I really don't know why it's been 3 weeks and nothing has been done with the children, with my kids and my wife. But we still keep the fight going on.
All right, let's return now to our top story in Gaza. Hamas officials saying that the death toll there has now surpassed 8,000 people. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the war in Gaza has entered a second phase, warning it will be long and difficult. Mr. Netanyahu described the conflict as Israel's second war of independence. He declared Israel would win the war and make every effort to bring the hostages home. The Israeli Prime Minister has met with families of those hostages being held by Hamas, who have expressed concern about the intensifying attacks that we're seeing in Gaza over the past hours. Mr. Netanyahu promised to do everything possible to bring them home. Well, speaking to the BBC, the senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister, Mark Regev, said that he believes Hamas would not release those hostages unless they were under pressure.
It was a very emotional meeting and a long meeting, and the Prime Minister heard each and every one of them, heard them out and said what needed to be said. And without going into what was said in the meeting, I can tell you what the position of the government is. that precisely because Hamas are not humanitarians, we will only get our people released if they are under very strong pressure. And only if they feel that that pressure is constantly escalating against them. And we believe that the best way to get the hostages out is to keep that pressure up, keep the pressure on Hamas, keep increasing the pressure on Hamas. That's the way to get the hostages out.
Well, a bit earlier, my colleague Helen Humphrey spoke to BBC Arabic reporter Mohammed Taha from our newsroom in London about the situation currently unfolding in the region.
Still, rockets from Gaza are hitting some Israeli towns in southern Israel. We understand that rockets have been launched towards Osdod, Rishon LeZion, Bavni in southern Tel Aviv, and in return the missiles and the raids on Gaza is still intensified. It is unprecedented. As Benjamin Netanyahu said, this war will be long, will be difficult. And as we can see in these pictures on the screens, this is Gaza Strip. It's pitch black. There is no communications, no electricity, and the raids from yesterday are unprecedented. They are intensified. The IDF is doing frequent incursions inside the Gaza Strip and maybe going back. The massive ground attack did not start yet. Hamas released a video where they said they attacked one armored vehicle from the type of Panther. And they said they destroyed it. We do not have any independent source to confirm that or not. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is getting worse and worse. And as you said previously, the UN is warning from a real humanitarian crisis in the Strip unless more caravans, more aid coming to the Strip.
I want to ask you more about that, Mohammed, because on the point of the humanitarian situation, we've also been hearing from our BBC colleague Rushdie Abu Alouf in southern Gaza that only life-saving interventions will be taking place in the south right now at hospitals. So just tell us more about the catastrophic circumstances we are seeing when it comes to the humanitarian situation and what people need inside Gaza.
Yes, Helena, imagine the Israeli army still issuing that warning to the residents in northern Gaza and eastern Gaza where the raids are continuing to leave their homes. These people should join other people who are in the streets, in the schools, in hospitals, seeking refuge from these continuous raids on Gaza. Answering your questions about the hospitals without proper medical equipment, without electricity, without communication with the medical teams on the ground, how on earth they would be able to work. So unless these aid are coming from Rafah crossing with Egypt, and unless the communications would be re-established again, unless they have electricity to see what they are doing in the hospitals if they want to have to do operations, and so on and so forth, how injured people and patients would be treated. Hamas are talking about 7,600 casualties so far from the Israeli raid. We don't have independent source to confirm that, as many governments in the West are maybe disputing that. Hamas yesterday issued a list of these more than 7,000 people who died to confirm that this is the correct total of casualties.
Mohammed, one thing I do want to ask you about is that we've also been hearing from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today saying that troops are moving south. Now, we know, of course, that the warning has been from the IDF for all civilians in Gaza to move south so that troops would go into the north. So what does that mean for civilians right now? How confused are they when they've had one message to move from one part of the Gaza Strip and now we understand troops are going to another part?
This confusion is from the start of this war, Helena, as the IDF was issuing this warning for the residents in North Gaza to move towards south, and while they were moving, they faced raids on their way to find safety. And also the massive confusion happened when the explosion happened in the Ma'madani hospital. Now when the Israeli forces are talking about that the leadership of Hamas are hiding under the ground, under the Al-Shifa hospital, this is a massive warning that this hospital could be a target. So the confusion around where for the residents to go or to stay or to seek refuge in a school or a hospital, or to stay south or to stay north. I guess there is no a safe place in the entire strip of Gaza at the moment, because the IDF are saying every time that the Hamas fighters, the Hamas militants are using civilians as human shields. They are hiding under hospitals, under schools. So we cannot. This confusion is still going on, and it is a very, very tiny piece of land. It's called a strip for a reason, because it is a tiny piece of land that these intensified raids on the strip cannot make anywhere safe in the strip at the moment.
Mohammed Taha there from BBC Arabic, joining us from the newsroom there in London. Thank you so much for your reporting, Mohammed.
2 million people living there in Gaza. There are also some 200 British citizens. Lola Ali Fatin's 29-year-old daughter, Zainab, is married to a Palestinian. She went to Gaza to attend a wedding just days before the Hamas attack in Israel. Zainab traveled there with 11 other members of her family from the UK, including a 13-year-old. Our community affairs correspondent Ashita Nagesh has been speaking to Lula about her daughter's ordeal.
Hello, my name is Zainab and I'm a British national. Me and my family came here 2 days before the war started, and we've been unable to get out ever since.
Zainab, a schoolteacher in Greater Manchester, had gone to Gaza for a wedding and is now trapped near the Rafah crossing.
Is this here in Manchester?
Yeah, it's Manchester. I think
Her mother, Lola, is hoping she'll be home soon.
How does it feel for you being here and sort of watching what's happening from afar?
I feel powerless. I feel as much as I can do, it's not enough. And it's a very painful experience to have to go through, to see people go through so much suffering and not be able to do anything.
Thousands of bombs have landed.
Zainab posted this video on Instagram 2 days ago, pleading for help.
We've contacted the British Embassy to at the very least get out its own citizens, but with no luck.
The FCDO says it's been keeping in close contact with British nationals in Gaza and will update them on the status of the southern border.
Death toll is rising every day. Every day we wait to hear from Zainab in the morning or in the afternoon, whenever she gets a signal, just to see if, whether she made it through the night.
This was the last message Lola had from Zainab, letting her mother know she was alive. But Lola hasn't heard anything since last night, when communications from Gaza were cut off.
The last few weeks have been really quite harrowing, just to watch the images on TV and to see such high numbers of deaths of innocent women and children and civilians is been very painful, and it kind of feels like a nightmare, to be honest, at the moment.
Lola Ali Fatin ending that report there from Ashita Nagesh. Well, demonstrations have taken place in cities around the world calling for a ceasefire and for aid to be allowed into Gaza. This right here, that was Paris, where a pro-Palestinian demonstration went ahead despite a ban. A French court said that the march could risk disturbing public order given the rise in anti-Semitic acts in France since the beginning of the hostilities. This year, Stockholm in Sweden, where thousands marched through the Swedish capital to show their support for Palestinians. And in London, thousands of people marching, urging an end to Israel's attacks in Gaza. More now from Tom Simons in London.
Stop bombing Gaza! Stop bombing Gaza! A protest, the organisers said, of more than 300,000 people. At one point, it stretched 1.5 miles through the streets of London. There have been many personal responses to this month's horrifying events in Israel and Gaza. Here today, there was one central demand.
Ceasefire! And we want it now!
You know, when you kill an innocent person with a bomb or a gun or a knife, it doesn't matter who's doing it. It's the same terrorism.
In the last week, the Metropolitan Police has been put under pressure by the Home Secretary Suella Braverman to take a tough line on any protesters who might say, or in the case of banners, write anything which breaches terrorism laws. As far as we can tell, protesters have generally not done that today, and the policing has been light.
Ordinary people from towns and cities across the UK have had to prove that they are not here supporting terrorism, that they are here supporting human rights, but they are coming despite that pressure, despite the outrageous statements from our government. They are coming in their hundreds of thousands, and they are raising the flag of Palestine high and proudly.
We want boycott!
There were shouts of, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free."
Palestine will be free!
Regarded by Jewish groups and Israel as a threat to its existence, and by the Home Secretary Suella Braverman as anti-Semitic. Supporters of Palestine say it's a call for freedom from repression and not a threat. No action was taken today by police, who were mainly holding back in side streets. The Met said there had been 2 arrests linked to an assault on a police officer and racist remarks. Here in Cardiff and in Glasgow, Belfast and other cities. Organisers of the main demonstration say there are more to come. Tom Simons, BBC News, Central London.
Well, we have some developing political news right here in the U.S. 2024 Republican presidential candidate, former Vice President Mike Pence, has announced that he is withdrawing from the race. He made that announcement to a crowd in Las Vegas, saying that he had no regrets.
With everything our country is facing, I just couldn't sit this one out. But the Bible tells us that there's a time for every purpose under heaven. And traveling across the country over the past 6 months, I came here to say it's become clear to me. This is not.
All right, let's get more now on the 2024 race. And that breaking news, we can bring in Robert Costa, CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Robert, thank you so much for joining us at this late hour. As we heard there, Mike Pence dropping out on Saturday saying, hey, this is not my time. But given the polling numbers, given the low fundraising numbers, how much of a surprise is this decision?
The decision was not a surprise, but it is significant in the Republican Party because former Vice President Mike Pence is the first of the major candidates who have been contesting former President Donald Trump's grip on the party's base and their voters to drop out of the race, to at least suspend his campaign. And the question for months in the minds of so many major donors and party leaders I've spoken with in the course of my reporting is, when will this field be culled? When will it shrink to a point where someone singular could emerge as the alternative, the leading alternative to Trump? And as long as everyone's in the race, the view is in the Republican Party that they're all splitting that non-Trump vote if they're not Trump himself.
Well, how does this departure then affect the rest of the Republican field? And of course, we have that next Republican debate looming down in Miami, don't we?
A real test will be whether people make that debate in Miami. The Republican National Committee has not yet announced who is going to make that stage and make it in terms of meeting the polling thresholds and the fundraising thresholds necessary to earn a spot on that stage. But even if you make the stage in Miami on November 8th, it's not a guarantee of any kind of traction or political attention or money, because Trump has decided to sit out the debates entirely. And for many of these candidates, they have spent years, if not a lifetime, thinking about the presidency. So it's hard to back away. But ultimately, money and not being on the debate stage could push some of them to think about doing what Pence did today, which is suspend his campaign.
Bob, you alluded to this earlier, but just looking at this with a bird's eye view, you know, Pence was one of those rare Republican voices that more firmly, at least, spoke out against the events of January 6th. He condemned some of the actions of former President Donald Trump at that time. What does Mike Pence's lack of success say about the current state of the Republican Party?
It's an example of how the Republican Party has not yet had a reckoning about what happened on January 6, 2021. Many Democrats see it as a seismic moment in American democratic history. Republicans, however, are still mostly embracing Trump, even though he had a role in spearheading so much of the effort to overturn the 2020 election. Pence's decision, and I've covered it extensively, to reject Trump's overtures to block the certification of President Biden's election enraged Trump, and it enraged many voters. Pence has maintained he did the right thing ever since then and followed the rule of law. But he has paid a political price. I was with him in Iowa when Pence announced earlier this year for his 2024 run. I've seen him on the campaign trail. And as much as he is popular with so-called traditional conservatives who like his view on social issues and economic issues, that searing experience of January 6th did alienate him, evidently, with so many Trump voters who continue in many quarters to repeat Trump's false claim that he won the 2020 election.
Bob, I want to hop over to the Democrats right now. Dean Phillips this week announcing that he's going to run against a sitting president, President Biden on the Democratic side. What more do we know about Phillips and how serious of a challenge this might be?
At this moment, it's not a, quote, serious challenge. He faces enormous hurdles running against an incumbent president as a late entry. Think about all the logistical and political challenge he faces in the weeks and months ahead. That said, I did spend time with Congressman Phillips at a home he owns in Virginia this week on the eve of his announcement. He made his announcement through our interview on CBS News. And then I joined him on the campaign trail to cover his first day in New Hampshire. He believes that because President Biden has decided not to be on the ballot in New Hampshire, he could have a lane there to build some support. Now, if Phillips won New Hampshire next year, he would not win delegates because of the Democratic Party rules about their calendar. South Carolina is now going first, not New Hampshire. But Dean could get a jolt of momentum should he do well in New Hampshire next year. But what's intriguing about Congressman Phillips and to think about is that he's actively encouraging other Democrats to get in the race. So his campaign is not just about electing Dean Phillips president, though he would like to see that happen. He would like to see some major Democrats get in and force competition inside of the Democratic Party to not make it, as he describes it repeatedly in his remarks, quote, coronation of President Biden for the Democratic nomination.
All right, Robert Costa, CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Thank you so much as always.
Thank you.
All right, another story we're closely following here in the Americas. Thousands of members of Mexico's armed forces have joined cleanup and recovery efforts in Acapulco, where at least 39 deaths are being blamed on Hurricane Otis. It hit the town earlier this week as a Category 5 storm. Our David Waddell has more.
The devastation is clear to see. Acapulco has never recorded a Category 5 hurricane, and this one has wreaked havoc along the coastline. The World Meteorological Organization has described the storm as one of the most rapidly intensifying tropical cyclones on record. Only one other, Patricia in 2015, has exceeded it. The speed at which Otis intensified took the government and weather forecasters by surprise. There was precious little time to issue warnings and prepare residents and tourists for its arrival.
It's like a movie. It's like the apocalypse. It really is like the apocalypse. But I hope Acapulco can recover as quickly as possible, because it seems like 90% of the buildings are being damaged.
There are reports supermarkets have been looted. The authorities say a security force of 17,000 personnel has been deployed across the area to maintain order. Furthermore, the Mexican Army and Navy have established an air bridge, says the government, to accelerate the distribution of humanitarian aid. Acapulco is home to 800,000 people. 200,000 homes have been damaged. Many are destroyed. Initial estimates suggest the cost may run to $15 billion. Those repairs will have to wait.
We are asking for food and water. We have no electricity. The electricity poles are down. We need food. That's what we are basically asking for.
Many locals are also struggling to communicate with friends and family, with cell networks out of action. But the immediate concern is to eat and drink. With supply chains under pressure, thousands of litres of water and food supplies are being distributed. It's a monumental challenge. David Waddell, BBC News.
I'm Carl Nassman. Stay with us for more right here on BBC News.